Yeah, I know, a lot of people are tired of hearing about it, but today we're taking a look. How realistic is it, really, for there to be another altcoin season? Because what you have to say at this point is, based on time and data, it's getting pretty tight. There's less and less room for an altcoin season to actually happen, and the longer it gets delayed, the less likely it becomes. We'll also talk at the end about how realistic I personally think the whole thing is. But first, let's take a look. What do we actually need in order to really expect to see an altcoin season? But before we continue, friends, as always, please leave a like and a comment so the video can reach as many people as possible. It's always a lot of work, and I hope you appreciate that. The first important point is an overheated Bitcoin. We absolutely need that, because only when Bitcoin is overheated can we see a rotation into other assets. And you can easily take a look at that here. This is the P-cycle top indicator. The P-cycle top indicator gives us a pretty good idea of when Bitcoin is overheated and how close we are to the Bitcoin top. Because every time we cross the purple line here, we're overheated, and after that, we had a big altcoin season. That's really been the case in every cycle so far. Only in this cycle have we not reached it yet. But we've almost tested it twice. Take a look at it. We even briefly tested it here, but then bounced right off again. Here we almost tested it, then crashed right back down. And that's the difference. This cycle is being deliberately prolonged. They're trying to stretch out this cycle so that the market makers, the big players here, can get much more out of it. Accordingly, we are still far from having an overheated Bitcoin. The second thing that's extremely important is that Bitcoin dominance is at its peak and that we're now seeing a decline in Bitcoin dominance. I've just told you, based on time and data, things are getting tighter here. But this could also indicate that Bitcoin dominance will drop more quickly and that the altcoin season will be shorter but much more explosive. This possibility exists. What I really like here is that we're now down here on the MACD and forming a bearish cross. This suggests that we should expect a longer negative trend. And if we do have a negative trend here, it indicates that Bitcoin dominance will drop for now. I mean, just take a look. We had the same thing here. After that, we saw the drop in Bitcoin dominance. This drop here was also indicated here. And this huge drop was also signaled here. Otherwise, we were in a bullish uptrend the whole time. So at the moment, it's a very, very good sign that we're forming a bearish cross here. This could definitely point to a longer term downside trend, and that would be very, very important. Because some people believe that Bitcoin dominance should go higher than 66%, since in the past we were at almost 73% here. But that's a misconception, because if we look at Bitcoin dominance without including stablecoins, then in this cycle we already reached 73% Bitcoin dominance, and that's quite alarming. We were basically at the same level as in previous years. It just didn't look like it because, of course, stablecoins were included here, and nowadays stablecoins have become so huge in the crypto market that they take up a large share of the market. But because we were also standing so high, in my opinion, this also suggests that we could definitely start to see the drop here, that maybe this was finally the top. Of course, it's not yet 100% confirmed, but this bearish cross that we're seeing develop here definitely already points in that direction. But even in the case of a bearish cross, you have to say that it stretches out over weeks, over months. That doesn't mean that Bitcoin dominance will drop 20% tomorrow. No, of course it takes time, but the direction is already set. We also need a loose monetary policy. That's extremely important because Bitcoin dominance is also somehow connected to loose monetary policy. Let's take a look at that. Here we see the Fed balance sheet. With a loose monetary policy, we saw Bitcoin dominance decline here and the money was reallocated into risk assets. With a restrictive monetary policy, we can clearly see that Bitcoin dominance only increases here. So when the Federal Reserve makes money tight and pulls money out of the market, we see that, if anything, the money only flows into Bitcoin. Accordingly, a loose monetary policy is extremely important for us to see a drop in Bitcoin dominance. When it comes to monetary policy, we can already see huge surges in the M2 money supply in the USA, Japan, China, and Europe. We see that more and more money is being printed, more and more money is flowing into the markets, which is extremely positive. But that's also the reason why Bitcoin is currently performing so well. However, it must be said that if you look at the Fed's balance sheet, you can see that the US is still partially withdrawing money from circulation to fight inflation. Especially once that ends, we could really see a strong rise here, because the most important factor for an easy monetary policy is not Europe, not China, not Japan. No, it's the USA. The USA is once again leading the way here. That's why it's also good to see that the US M2 money supply is expanding here. But it's even more important that we see a positive balance sheet here and that interest rates are being lowered. But what needs to be said about this? Last Wednesday, we had that speech from Jerome Powell, and by now it looks like there's a 90% chance we'll see interest rate cuts on September 17th. And that's extremely positive because it would settle this question as well. That would automatically mean we would be moving back toward a looser monetary policy. So, slowly, not immediately, but step by step, this is the starting signal for a looser monetary policy. That means the foundation is being laid here as well, and things are looking better and better. On top of that, the dollar has really tanked. The dollar has lost a lot of value, which is actually positive on the one hand, because when the dollar loses value, we naturally have more money for risk assets. By the way, that's also the reason why Bitcoin is at an all-time high, because the dollar has lost so much value. In the Eurozone, Bitcoin isn't even at an all-time high yet. That's really crazy. The fact that the dollar is so weak actually suggests that people are investing in risk assets. However, we can see that gold is still at an all-time high, which argues against that. If gold is at an all-time high, that actually suggests we're not so risk-seeking here and that we definitely have a tight monetary policy. Because here too, we see this correlation again. When more and more money was withdrawn from the markets through the balance sheet, Bitcoin really surged. You can see again how closely monetary policy is linked to the price of gold. But if we see a turnaround here and start rising again, I can imagine that gold will undergo a correction. That would also be essential. Besides, a correction is simply long overdue. If we see a correction in gold, more money will automatically be left over for altcoins, for Bitcoin and Ethereum. And here you have to pay attention to this indicator, the copper to gold ratio. Because when copper is too cheap compared to gold, it indicates that investments are being made more in risk-free assets, such as gold. But if copper becomes more expensive again in relation, money will automatically be shifted from gold, and the altcoins and the crypto market will benefit more from it. You can see it here. When the price of copper dropped sharply, gold skyrocketed. What we need here is a reversal and a rise in copper again, then we'll see gold drop immediately. We're not quite there yet, but I can already imagine that we've more or less seen the top for gold. That would at least be important with regard to the altcoin season. And the last point is simply that we need to get retail investors plus FOMO into the market. But that's something that will happen anyway, with an overheated Bitcoin, with the drop in Bitcoin dominance, and with a loose monetary policy. And when we see the shift from gold into risk assets, retail investors will come in anyway, and then FOMO will kick in as well. Everything kind of works together, the monetary policy, Bitcoin, and so on. What I also really like is, in this chart here, the Ethereum Bitcoin chart, we can clearly see that the MACD is also slowly building a bullish trend, that we've basically seen the bottom here, and that Ethereum can now start to outperform Bitcoin. And if that's the case, it generally speaks in favor of altcoins as well. Now let's get to my overall conclusion. I believe the foundation for altcoins is currently being laid. The foundation looks really solid right now. We're seeing a loose monetary policy going forward. We're seeing the M2 money supply rising significantly. Gold is at an all-time high. All we can do is hope that we drop here. Bitcoin dominance was basically at an all-time high. So here too, we can only hope that this really was the all-time high. And accordingly, in my opinion, things are looking pretty good for us to see an altcoin season this year after all. However, as I said, this doesn't happen overnight. Of course, it takes several days or weeks, and the drop in Bitcoin dominance also doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes it can even take another 9 months. I mean, in terms of timing and data, it would also be fine if we see a drop here that maybe lasts 4 or 5 months, but in that case, we would basically have an altcoin season for 4 or 5 months. That's exactly how the whole thing works here. And the interesting thing is, the higher Bitcoin rises now, and the later the drop in Bitcoin dominance happens, the more money we'll ultimately have left over for the altcoins. Because, I mean, just look at the difference. If we drop from 60 to 40% Bitcoin dominance when Bitcoin is at $120,000, we immediately have twice as much market cap available for the altcoins. And that's why it's also a huge difference if we see the drop in Bitcoin dominance at $200,000, because then we'd have significantly more money left over for the altcoins. That's why it's really not that bad at all. It's also good that this cycle is being prolonged for so long, because the longer it is drawn out, the higher the prices we'll see for Bitcoin, and conversely, also for the altcoins. Don't let yourselves get worked up about this either. Some people have always said that because we have the Bitcoin ETFs, because we have MicroStrategy and things like that, there won't be an altcoin season this cycle, that only Bitcoin will perform. Just take a look at what Ethereum has achieved in such a short time. No one believed in Ethereum anymore, and out of nowhere, Ethereum has more than doubled in such a short period, and Bitcoin is definitely lagging far behind. If that's possible with Ethereum, then it's even more possible with the other altcoins. Besides, in the last cycle, we also had some major players who only accumulated Bitcoin, but in the end, we still had a massive altcoin season. And I hope you enjoyed it so far. As always, leave a like and a comment and see you next time, friends. Bye.